2 years ago, after completing my master's in computer science with a focus on network security, I moved to New York City to start my career. Landing a job at Google right out of school seemed like the perfect opportunity. However, the biggest challenge was finding a place to live. I assumed I could afford an apartment in Manhattan, but quickly realized that renting on my own was almost impossible unless I wanted multiple roommates. After some advice from coworkers, I shifted my search to Brooklyn, where things finally started to come together. One evening, my companion and I headed to a new restaurant on Church Street with good reviews. We passed a gay club as the door opened, revealing a performer dressed as Madonna on stage. She looked at me, confused. Why would they want to do that? My thoughts wandered back to memories of Mickey and Beth. 24 months ago, Brooklyn. I hate the bar scene, I said, frustrated after another failed attempt at meeting someone. Mickey just laughed, but I was serious. Earlier that night at a Soho bar, a drunk girl spilled 2 beers all over me. She mumbled an apology and the bartender gave me a towel, but the damage was done. I headed home, embarrassed to ride the subway soaked in beer. People stared, probably thinking I was homeless. When I reached my stop, I hurried back to my apartment. Mickey opened the door, grinning. Looks like you had a party. I wasn't amused, but I knew better than to snap at my 6'5" drag queen roommate. I had moved to New York 18 months ago after getting my master's in computer science. Google had offered me a dream job with great pay and a relocation from Nashville, but finding an apartment in Manhattan was harder than I expected, unless I wanted to live with 5 roommates in a tiny space. After some advice from coworkers, I started looking in Brooklyn. That's how I ended up walking down a charming Brooklyn street looking for an apartment. I found the address next to a small restaurant and climbed the stairs to meet the tenants, Mickey and Beth. Beth, a slim woman in a leotard, opened the door. After a brief introduction, she led me inside to meet Mickey, a towering man who, despite his intimidating height, was polite and showed me around the surprisingly nice apartment. They offered me the biggest room, but at 60% of the rent. Still, it was affordable, so I considered it. But before I could say yes, they started asking about my job and lifestyle, like I was applying for a club membership. Then Mickey asked, "Are you gay?" "I'm not gay," I said, "but I hope you won't hold that against me." Mickey laughed. "I guess you can be our token straight tenant." After that, we relaxed, and I moved in. Beth was a dancer by passion, though she worked as a waitress to pay the bills. Mickey, on the other hand, performed as a female impersonator on weekends and worked at Starbucks during the day. Despite the initial awkwardness, we made a good household. I quickly realized that despite the intense questioning during my apartment visit, Mickey and Beth were eager to find a roommate, especially one willing to cover most of the rent. We soon settled into a comfortable routine. Seeing Mickey in makeup became normal, and I politely ignored Beth's occasional overnight guests. To them, I was a mix between a novelty and a curiosity. They'd only had female roommates before, so a straight Southern guy like me was something new. My accent became a source of constant amusement, but overall, it was a learning experience for all of us. Working at Google was another challenge. Surrounded by brilliant minds, I initially felt out of place. It took time to adjust and contribute, but after 6 months, I started to find my footing. The job required frequent trips to California, which became exhausting over time, especially when I had to be back in the office the next morning after long flights. As a result, my personal life took a hit, or would have if I'd had much of one. I hadn't dated much since losing my parents in a tragic accident just before my college graduation. The grief consumed me for a while, delaying my plans for graduate school and forcing me to handle their affairs. By the time I enrolled at MIT a year later, I had left Nashville behind, both physically and emotionally. At MIT, I focused on my studies, barely socializing. With a skewed male-to-female ratio, dating opportunities were slim. By the time I graduated and moved to New York, I hoped to meet new people. But the dating scene wasn't what I expected. Many women I met were older and looking for a serious commitment, while others, closer to my age, seemed more interested in partying and alcohol. The final straw came when a drunken woman at a Soho bar spilled beer all over me. Frustrated, I vented to Mickey, who listened patiently. "You're going about this all wrong," he said. "Meeting women in bars won't work if the only thing you have in common is alcohol." He suggested I try a dating website called Eye Contact. I was skeptical, but Mickey convinced me to give it a shot. The site was expensive, which Mickey explained was intentional to weed out casual daters. Hesitant but curious, I signed up and filled out a lengthy questionnaire about myself, rather than focusing on what I wanted in a partner. As I finished, Beth peeked over my shoulder, offering her usual sarcastic commentary. But, despite her opinions, I was ready to see where this new approach might lead. The next step was uploading a photo. I didn't have any, but Beth quickly grabbed her digital camera, adjusted the lighting, and snapped a few shots. When I asked how I looked, she quipped, "Almost human." Still, she uploaded one to my profile, and it looked pretty decent. After saving my profile, I asked Mickey, "Now what?" He smiled. "Just wait. This gets good." Moments later, profiles of 3 women appeared on the screen, each attractive and interesting. I rated them based on appearance, interests, and overall appeal, while Mickey and Beth whispered and laughed behind me. Curious, I asked, "How do I contact them?" Mickey grinned. "You don't. They're just models." Before I could get frustrated, a message appeared. Within 24 hours, eye contact would provide real matches based on my preferences, complete with contact info. "That's it?" I asked. Mickey assured me, "Trust me, by tomorrow you'll be impressed." The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it, but I had to wait until after work to log in. When I got home, both Mickey and Beth hovered over my shoulder as I checked the site. 3 profiles popped up. The first was a cute redhead working as a copywriter. She seemed fun. The second, a tall brunette from an art gallery, made me think of museum dates and cozy dinners. Both were appealing. But the third, she was stunning. With dark hair, striking eyes, and high cheekbones. An investment banker, a little older than me. But our interests matched perfectly. Beth, looking over my shoulder, remarked that she would date the woman herself. As I was about to click on the contact info, Mickey stopped me and asked if I was sure she was the right choice, suggesting she might be out of my league. Annoyed, I reminded him that he had convinced me to try the service and insisted that if eye contact thought we were a match, I was going for it. Mickey backed off, raising his hands and advising me not to get burned. I clicked on the contact info and saw her name, Susan Devereaux, along with her phone number and email. I was about to email her when Beth stopped me, asking if I really planned to do that. I admitted I thought it was a low-pressure way to introduce myself, but Beth scoffed, saying an email wouldn't impress her. Instead, she suggested I call. Beth advised me to ask if Susan would be in town the following Monday, rather than a weekend, since she might already have plans. She also suggested meeting for a drink near Susan's office, as it would make her feel more comfortable and give her an easy way to leave if things didn't go well. The logic made sense, so I agreed. I grabbed my phone, saved Susan's contact info, and made the call. To my surprise, she answered. Following Beth's advice, I asked if she'd like to meet for a drink on Monday. She agreed, suggesting a place near her office. After setting the time for 7 o'clock, I ended the call feeling both amazed and relieved. The entire weekend I kept thinking about the meeting, debating what to wear and rehearsing conversations. I felt like a nervous teenager on his first date. Mickey, sensing my nerves, told me to relax and be myself, advice I knew I needed to follow. Monday arrived, and after work, I arrived at the restaurant right on time. She wasn't there yet, and as I ordered a drink, I started preparing myself for a possible no-show. But just as my drink arrived, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Susan, looking even more stunning in person. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before I knew it, it was 8:30. I suggested dinner, and she eagerly agreed. We continued chatting over a light meal, and I found her to be everything I had hoped for: engaging, funny, and genuinely interesting. Thankfully, she seemed to enjoy my company too, and the evening turned out better than I had imagined. I checked my phone and realized it was past 11 o'clock. Apologizing for keeping Susan out so late, I offered to get her a cab. As I opened the door for her, she paused and told me, "You're different from most men I meet." Curious, I asked, "Good different or bad different?" She smiled and replied, "Good different. Most guys would have tried something by now." I decided to ask if she'd like to go out again. She said, "Definitely. Call me next week," and kissed me on the cheek before getting into the cab. I made my way home, floating on air, thrilled with how the evening had gone. Showing restraint, I waited until Monday to call her. When she answered, I asked if she was still interested in meeting up. She agreed, but sounded a bit less enthusiastic than before. I asked what day worked for her, and she suggested Friday. Then, without thinking, I asked if there was anything specific she'd like to do. Instantly, I regretted it, feeling like I was out of ideas already. She simply said, "Surprise me." After hanging up, I told Mickey how I felt I'd already messed things up, especially with the surprise request. We brainstormed ideas, but nothing seemed special enough. Finally, a bold plan came to mind, and I asked Mickey for help. He grinned and agreed, promising it would be unforgettable, even if it didn't go as planned. On Thursday, I called Susan to confirm the date, keeping the destination a secret. The next evening, I met her outside her office, and we took a cab to Grand Central Station. Once there, we sat on the mezzanine, overlooking the busy concourse. After a few minutes, Susan asked what we were doing. I smiled and said, "People watching." Just then, I pointed out a tall man in a fedora and trench coat below us. As he stopped, he set down a backpack, opened it, and music began to play. To Susan's surprise, the man threw off his coat, revealing a silver dress and heels, Mickey in full drag. As Lady Gaga's Born This Way blared, Mickey started dancing, joined by a group of performers who shed their coats to reveal matching outfits. The entire station stopped to watch, laughing and clapping. I glanced at Susan, and to my relief, she was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes, clapping along with the performance. It was clear the surprise had worked perfectly. As the song ended, the dancers blended back into the crowd, leaving Mickey alone. He climbed the stairs toward us, singing the final lines of Born This Way. When he reached us, he plopped into my lap and gave me a big kiss on the cheek. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Mickey stood, bowed, and then I introduced him to Susan. She told him the performance was amazing and admitted she'd never seen a flash mob in person. Afterward, we went to Mickey's club for food and drinks, and Susan had a great time. She enjoyed the performances and thought Mickey and his friends were wonderful. When we left, she pulled me into a cab, and after complimenting me on the surprise, kissed me passionately. We arrived at her place, and she hurried me inside. We spent the night together, full of passion, and I woke up the next morning to a repeat of the excitement. We showered together, and I finally had a chance to admire her in the daylight. She was fit and toned, and I was relieved that her body was natural and perfectly suited to her frame. Afterward, we joined her roommates for brunch. I was a bit embarrassed, knowing they likely heard everything from the night before, but they seemed unfazed. Susan introduced me to Missy and Brianna, her close friends from Vassar. Once brunch was over, I headed home, but Susan kissed me goodbye and asked me to call her, adding, "Surprise me again." Thus began our romance. We spent more and more time together, with work trips being the only real interruptions. I continually found new ways to surprise Susan, and she loved it. We visited Fort Tryon Park to see the cloisters, took a Circle Line cruise around Manhattan, and attended an avant-garde dance performance thanks to Beth's help. Susan enjoyed all these experiences, and I enjoyed making her happy. Over time, I spent more time at her apartment, where her roommates became used to me. I took her to my place in Brooklyn too, but she didn't seem as comfortable there. I also noticed that Susan and Beth didn't really connect, though they weren't hostile toward each other. It seemed like there was an unspoken tension between them, perhaps because of their differences. One Friday, we rented a car and drove to the Hamptons to spend the weekend with Susan's parents. As we arrived at their large mansion, my nerves increased, knowing they were quite wealthy. After Susan called out to them, her parents warmly greeted her, and I shook hands with Mr. and Mrs. Devereaux. Mrs. Devereaux, or Elaine, was elegant, though slightly altered by cosmetic surgery. Walter Devereaux was stocky, with white hair and a firm handshake. After a brief chat, we were shown to our rooms for the night. Susan went to her childhood room, while I was given a guest room. Later, Susan snuck into my room, dressed in a cute but sexy nightgown. Despite my concerns about her parents, she assured me she did what she wanted, and we spent the night together. The next morning, I hurried to join everyone for breakfast in the solarium. Mr. Devereaux mentioned plans for the day, a poolside lunch, a drive around town, and dinner at the club. I had hoped for more time alone with Susan, but it seemed the weekend would be busy with her parents. After breakfast, we toured the house and grounds. The sheer size of the mansion left me amazed. Later, we changed for the pool. While Susan and Elaine lounged in the sun, Walter and I relaxed under the cabana with screwdrivers. He spent much of the time discussing politics, and though I didn't agree with his extreme views, I kept my thoughts to myself. As the day wore on, the sun and drinks made me drowsy, and we all took naps in the afternoon. When I woke up, Walter drove us around the area, pointing out changes to Susan since she'd moved to Manhattan. I marveled at the massive estates along the Atlantic, a clear sign of the wealth in the area. By the time we returned to Susan's parents' house, it was nearly time for dinner. Although the dress code was casual, I suspected their version was different from mine. So I put on slacks, a knit shirt, and a sports coat. I felt fine until I saw Elaine and Susan in cocktail dresses fit for a red carpet. I was ready to panic, but Walter soon appeared in even more casual attire, not even wearing socks. At the club, I noticed the women dressed to impress, while the men kept it casual, though in expensive brands. Dinner was excellent, but conversation dragged. Mostly gossip from Elaine and Walter pointing out wealthy men at other tables. I barely paid attention, relieved only when Susan gave me a quick wink. After dinner, Walter invited me to the library for a brandy and asked about my background. He assumed my father was involved in music law, but I proudly corrected him, explaining my dad's work in constitutional law, even mentioning his cases before the Supreme Court. The conversation fizzled after that. The next day, I was relieved when Susan and I finally left for Manhattan. On the drive back, she teased me about looking like I'd been to the dentist. I told her the weekend felt like a constant interrogation and asked if her parents were always like that. She laughed and reassured me, explaining they were just protective since she was their only child. She shared stories of her rebellious youth, recounting how she had always done what she wanted despite their plans for her. Things changed for her in high school after a friend's tragedy made her realize the importance of self-reliance, motivating her to take school seriously and eventually attend Vassar. When I expressed concern about the impression I made on her parents, Susan dismissed it, saying they didn't think anyone was good enough for her. She even joked that her dad suggested a prenuptial agreement. This threw me off, making me wonder if Susan was hinting at marriage, though we hadn't discussed it yet. We held hands the rest of the way back to the city, my mind racing with thoughts about our future. Once back in New York, our busy travel schedules kept us apart, but whenever we reunited, our time together was marked by passionate intensity, as if we couldn't get enough of each other. I wasn't inexperienced in the bedroom, but I quickly realized Susan was on a whole different level. She knew how to take things to another level and taught me to do the same. I was curious about her past, but I knew I couldn't expect her to be a pure, especially in New York. Whatever her experiences were, I was benefiting now. While Susan was away on a business trip, I decided to propose. Being bold had worked before, so I figured it was worth trying again. I retrieved my grandmother's engagement ring from my safe deposit box, hoping Susan would appreciate its sentimental value. When Susan returned from Boston late Tuesday, she was exhausted, so we made plans for Wednesday night. I kept the surprise quiet, and after dinner and dancing, I took her to the Empire State Building. We rode to the 102nd floor, where I led her to the edge. Just as she turned to ask why we were there, I dropped to one knee and presented the ring. "Susan Devereaux, will you marry me?" I asked. Shocked at first, she quickly said yes, to the cheers of nearby tourists. After slipping the ring on her finger, we headed to her apartment, where she excitedly shared the news with her roommates, Missy and Brianna. That night, Susan said it was the best surprise ever. The next morning, she shocked me again by suggesting we skip a big wedding and get married immediately at City Hall. Despite my concerns about her parents, she was adamant. She wanted to do it right away. The next day, we arrived at the Manhattan Marriage Bureau, but after completing the paperwork, we learned about the mandatory 24-hour waiting period. Susan was undeterred, planning to return the next day with Missy and Brianna as her bridesmaids. I was happy to go along with whatever made her happy, and called Mickey and Beth, who agreed to come as witnesses. On Friday afternoon, I waited in my best suit as Susan arrived in a stunning black dress with a large hat, flanked by her bridesmaids in matching off-white dresses. The ceremony was short and sweet, and after we kissed as husband and wife, Beth popped open a bottle of champagne to celebrate. We moved into the hallway to make way for the next couple, sharing champagne straight from the bottle. Mickey handed me the keys to the car he'd rented for us, and as we left, Susan tossed her bouquet to Beth. "I guess that's one tradition that won't come true," I joked as we drove off, beginning our new life together. As we headed toward the Holland Tunnel, Susan asked, "Where are we going?" I smiled and told her to be patient, saying it was another surprise. I'd already had her pack for a short honeymoon, but hadn't revealed the destination. We drove north on I-81, then west on I-90. It wasn't until we reached Buffalo that she figured it out, laughing, "We're going to Niagara Falls for our honeymoon." She loved the idea and couldn't wait to tell her friends. I had chosen the Lover's Rest Motel with its neon heart-shaped sign. When we entered our honeymoon suite, complete with a heart-shaped bed and in-room jacuzzi, Susan burst out laughing, especially when the bed rotated and vibrated. She declared it absolutely perfect before we settled into the fun. Despite it being a short weekend, we had a great time. We visited Niagara and Horseshoe Falls, even getting drenched on the Maid of the Mist. While the area around Niagara Falls was a bit tacky, we enjoyed exploring the scenic countryside near Lake Ontario. After our long drive back to Manhattan, we were exhausted but happy. We left our bags unpacked and collapsed into bed, eager for sleep after a weekend of honeymoon fun. As I held Susan close, I whispered, "Good night, Mrs. Morrison," and she murmured, "Thank you, baby." It was a wonderful surprise, before falling asleep. The next morning, Missy and Brianna had already left for work. I had taken an extra day off to move my things into the apartment. As I brought in my belongings, I asked Susan when her roommates planned to move out. She seemed surprised, saying she hadn't thought about it and didn't want to ask them to leave, as they'd lived together since college. I wasn't thrilled with her response, but decided to let it go. Living with two other women wasn't as glamorous as it might seem. They treated me like part of the furniture, casually going about their lives, sometimes even walking around in their underwear, but it was clear there was no intent behind it. Later, I overheard Susan on the phone with her parents, telling them about our quick wedding. Though they weren't happy, she confidently told me they'd get over it, as they always did. As time passed, Susan and I settled into our married life, which wasn't much different from before, aside from the official status. My job had improved, and I was now a team leader, though my West Coast travel kept me busy. I stayed in touch with Mickey and Beth, even helping a coworker move into my old apartment so they wouldn't be financially impacted by my departure. If there was any stress in our life, it was my constant effort to keep surprising Susan, as she thrived on spontaneity. Finding new, exciting experiences wasn't easy, especially with our demanding schedules. As we approached our 1-year anniversary, I wanted to do something special, but struggled to come up with an idea. After a long red-eye flight delayed by storms, I arrived home completely exhausted and decided to take the day off. The apartment was empty, so I collapsed on the bed, my mind still racing for a surprise idea. Then I noticed Susan had left her laptop on, which was unusual for her. Out of curiosity, I moved the mouse and saw a Google News window. As I closed it, I accidentally discovered an open tab for eye contact, thanking her for renewing her membership. I was shocked. Why was she still using the dating site? I checked her recycle bin and downloads, but everything had been cleared. I knew Google's Chrome browser well enough to realize that hitting Clear All doesn't truly delete downloads. So I opened the Windows Downloads folder and was shocked to find it filled with profiles from eye contact. Susan had downloaded dozens of them, about one every 2 weeks. As I reviewed the files, I found one with my own profile picture taken almost a year ago by Beth. To my horror, the most recent profile was from the day before, featuring a red-headed man from Boston. Susan was scheduled to fly to Boston the next day. I tried to stay calm, hoping there was an innocent explanation, but my instincts told me something was wrong. After copying all the profiles onto a flash drive and returning Susan's computer to its original state, I researched detective agencies. I found one, called them, and arranged a meeting. When I met with Miss Martin, a professional detective, I shared my story. She copied the files and Susan's profile from my flash drive. I asked her to investigate what Susan did in Boston the next night. Miss Martin assured me they would have a report ready by the following afternoon. Afterward, I called Susan and left a message, pretending to be stuck in Mountain View for a few more days. Then I reached out to Mickey and went over to talk things through with him and Beth. While Mickey hoped for the best, Beth was skeptical, and I feared she was right. I stayed at their place overnight. The next day, I went to work as usual. Early in the afternoon, Miss Martin called to let me know the report was ready. I arrived at her office at 3 o'clock, filled with conflicting emotions. Part of me hoped for a misunderstanding, but I knew the truth was coming. Miss Martin handed me the report and said, "I regret to inform you that your suspicions were correct." The report included photos of Susan leaving her hotel and meeting a red-headed man, the same one from the eye contact profile. They had drinks, dinner, and danced together for hours. My heart sank as I realized what had been happening. The next photo was dark, but it clearly showed Susan and Red dancing, caught mid-kiss, with his hand on her rear. Miss Martin continued, "They took a cab back to the hotel and went to Susan's room. The next image showed them in the elevator, embracing, with Red's hand up Susan's skirt. The timestamp read 11:45 p.m. The next morning, Miss Martin said, he left the hotel around 7:30 a.m., and Mrs. Morrison checked out about an hour later. The final photo showed Susan, now in a business suit, getting into a cab. I asked, "So there's no actual proof of what happened in the room?" Miss Martin responded calmly, explaining that they had planted a motion-sensitive camera in Susan's room. She handed me a CD, but advised against watching it, warning that while I already knew the truth, the video would only create painful, unforgettable images. I hesitated, but agreed to think about it. Miss Martin asked if I was considering reconciliation. "No way," I said, explaining that not only had Susan betrayed me, but this was a planned affair. Plus, I knew there were many more profiles on her computer. Unfazed, Miss Martin asked if I had legal representation. I admitted I didn't. So she offered to refer me to an attorney in the same building. I didn't care if the agency got a commission. I just wanted to move forward. She arranged for me to meet the lawyer that day. That evening, I returned to Brooklyn with the folder and a business card for my new attorney. Beth was home, and I told her everything. When I mentioned the CD, she offered to preview it for me. After watching it, she came back with tears in her eyes and gently advised me not to watch it, saying it would only make things worse. I took her advice. With my decision made, I focused on the details of what I needed to do. Mickey and Beth were fully supportive, already talking as though they were taking charge of the situation. Their care and involvement touched me deeply. I returned to Susan's apartment on Friday afternoon, carrying my bags as though I had just arrived from the airport. When I walked in, I found the three Musketeers huddled on the couch, giggling and whispering. As soon as I entered, Susan jumped up, ran over, and leaped into my arms while Brianna and Missy snickered. Susan told me she had missed me a lot as she kissed me passionately. Then, with a sly look, she reminded me that the weekend was our anniversary and asked if I remembered. I calmly assured her that I hadn't forgotten and mentioned that I had a surprise for her, but she would have to wait until Sunday. Excited, Susan said she couldn't wait that long and asked for a hint about the plan. I firmly responded that she would just have to wait. The rest of the evening went as usual, except for Susan frequently whispering to Missy and Brianna. I figured they were either guessing about the surprise or comparing me to Red. I chose to ignore it. At bedtime, Susan initiated lovemaking, as she often did after one of our trips, but I refused, knowing what she'd been doing in Boston. I pushed her away, saying, "Not tonight, and not tomorrow night either. It's part of the surprise. You'll have to wait until Sunday." She seemed shocked and frustrated since she was always eager after my California trips. But the anticipation of the surprise kept her from pressing further, and she eventually fell into a restless sleep. Saturday was just as frustrating for her. Missy and Brianna took turns trying to get details from me whenever Susan wasn't around, offering their help with the surprise. I assured them everything was under control, hoping it was, and then teased them by saying they be part of the surprise too. This sent them into excited chatter, and they eagerly told Susan, who could hardly sit still in anticipation. That evening, I gave no further clues and suggested we order takeout instead of going out. Reluctant to leave me alone and risk missing any secret planning, they stayed in. By bedtime, Susan's frustration was palpable. She tried to tempt me again, but I held firm. "You don't want to ruin the surprise," I reminded her, and she begrudgingly gave up, rolling over to sleep. Sunday morning, I knew I had to give them something to avoid rebellion. Over breakfast, I told them we'd leave the apartment at 12:30 sharp, no special clothing or bags required, and we'd all leave together in a single cab. Their curiosity was in overdrive, and I left them guessing while I stepped outside to call Mickey. He reassured me everything was ready. "Just be on time and enjoy the show," he said. At 12:30, I gathered the three of them and headed downstairs. The doorman found us a cab, and I slipped him a $50 tip. He looked surprised, but I liked him and knew I might never see him again. The girls piled into the back seat while I sat up front, allowing me to quietly tell the driver our destination, which the three Musketeers couldn't hear. This caused an uproar of curiosity from the back, which I ignored with a smile. Despite the traffic, we arrived a bit early. As they got out of the cab, the girls seemed confused, staring up at the towering statue of Christopher Columbus. Brianna asked, "Why are we at Columbus Circle? Is this where the surprise happens?" Smiling, I led them to the base of the statue and had them sit on the steps. The area was buzzing with tourists and passers-by enjoying the sunny day. Suddenly, a man approached and placed a boombox behind them, flicking it on. A rhythmic drum beat startled the girls and drew the attention of the crowd. As the beat continued, a group of passers-by gathered in a circle around the monument and, on cue, began a choreographed dance, reminiscent of the Rockettes. The music shifted to Katy Perry's hit, "The One That Got Away," a song Susan loved. She clapped in delight as the dancers performed in front of them. The crowd cheered and clapped along as the dancers strutted and kicked in time to the music. Susan, Missy, and Brianna were grinning and laughing, with Susan clearly enjoying the attention. As the routine continued, one of the dancers stepped forward, holding a poster of a man's face, showing it to the crowd and the girls. "Is this the one that got away?" The crowd seemed to wonder. Then more dancers appeared, each holding posters of different male faces. While Susan laughed at the performance, Missy suddenly frowned, recognizing one of the faces. She pointed it out to Brianna, who leaned in closer. The posters were pictures of the men from Susan's eye contact profile. As more faces appeared, Brianna began tugging on Susan's arm, urging her to look more carefully. Susan's mood shifted abruptly as she realized what was happening. She grew visibly agitated when she saw the last poster. It was the red-headed man she had spent the night with in Boston earlier that week. As the song reached the bridge, the dancers continued their high-energy routine, holding the posters aloft for everyone to see. At that moment, all the dancers dropped their posters to the ground. Then, from behind the statue, Mickey and Beth appeared, holding a single poster with pictures of Susan and me. They walked up to the three seated girls, whose faces had gone pale despite the bright afternoon sun. Mickey and Beth tugged on their sides of the poster, splitting it in two, separating my image from Susan's. They dropped the halves on the ground. The crowd seemed confused. The dancers had stopped, but the boombox kept playing the last line of the chorus on a loop. Instead of the laughter the audience expected from the three girls, They saw them crying and holding each other. A few people started clapping but were hushed by those still curious about what would happen next. As the song looped, the circle of dancers parted and I walked forward. I went straight to Susan. With tears streaming down her face, she looked up as I handed her a copy of my divorce petition. "Susan Devereaux Morrison, you have been served," I declared. As I turned to leave, Susan tried to follow, but Mickey gave her a menacing look, his towering presence forcing her to sink back, sobbing as her friends tried to console her. Beth had the last word. She stormed up to Susan and shouted, "You had a good man, but now thank God! He's the one who got away!" The music stopped, the dancers blended into the crowd, and the onlookers stood in awkward silence, the only sound being the sobs of the 3 humiliated girls at the feet of the Christopher Columbus statue. Mickey led Beth and me to a waiting cab, and we headed to Brooklyn. I briefly considered going back to ask Susan how she liked her surprise, but decided it was unnecessary. Susan tried contacting me repeatedly, but I ignored her calls, emails, and texts. Eventually, her lawyer reached out to mine, and I made it clear that the only time I talked to Susan was during negotiations for our property settlement. After a lot of back and forth, we scheduled a meeting. The session took place in Susan's law firm's offices. My lawyer wasn't happy about the location, but by then, he wasn't pleased with me anyway. I didn't care. We entered a conference room as large as Susan's apartment. While my lawyer seemed uneasy, I knew I had control, so it didn't bother me. What did surprise me was seeing Walter, Susan's father, sitting beside her. I should have expected that, I thought. He's probably bailed her out before. Once we were all seated, I glanced around the table. Susan's attorney looked at me like I was some odd specimen under a microscope, while Walter glared, clearly furious that I'd hurt his daughter. Susan avoided eye contact altogether. Her attorney spoke first. "Mr. Morrison, we've gathered here at your request to discuss a property settlement for the dissolution of this marriage. We have a proposal that I believe you'll find more than fair. Let's start there." My attorney began to speak, but I cut him off, saying firmly, "Forget it." Walter leaned in to whisper to Susan, but I overheard him clearly. "I told you to make him sign a prenup." Her attorney, embarrassed, tried to refocus on the settlement, but I wasn't having it. "Drop it," I repeated. I turned to Walter. "Mr. Devereaux, I married your daughter for love, not for money. You may not understand that, but my father taught me that a man's honor matters far more than his wealth." I addressed Susan's attorney again. "There are only 2 things I want in this settlement. Once you agree to them, I'll have no further demands. The first thing I want is for Susan to return my grandmother's engagement ring and wedding ring. They symbolize a commitment to share our lives and forsake all others, and Susan never lived up to or intended to keep that promise." Susan buried her head on the table and started to cry. "The second thing I want is 30 minutes alone with Susan, during which she promises to answer my questions truthfully. Give me those 2 things and I'll make no further claims." My attorney shook his head in disbelief, knowing Walter's net worth and realizing he wouldn't get a share of it. But Walter suddenly perked up. "Will you put that in writing?" he asked eagerly. I looked at him coldly. "In my family, a man's word is his bond, but for your peace of mind, yes, I'll sign an agreement." Walter didn't catch my sarcasm, too busy instructing his attorney to draft the contract. Then he turned to Susan, saying, "Give him the rings. Let's get out of this mess." As she wept, he patted her arm. "If they mean that much to you, your mother and I will buy you new ones." As she reluctantly removed the rings, I stood up. "Since we're all in agreement, I'd like everyone except Susan to leave the room. My 30 minutes start once you're gone." Walter hesitated, but eventually stood and pulled the family attorney toward the door. "Get that agreement written up immediately. I want his signature on it before he leaves." Once everyone else had left, Susan and I were left facing each other across the table. I sat for a moment, unsure where to begin. I had thought about this moment since the day at Columbus Circle, but now that it was here, I struggled to start. Finally, I decided to just ask, "When did it start, Susan?" She looked up, understanding my question. "I guess it never really stopped," she admitted. "Eye contact kept sending me profiles of all those attractive guys, and I wanted to sample them all. I thought you loved me," I said. "I did, Peter, I really did. But when you were away, I'd get bored and want to party. It didn't seem wrong to try out alternatives, especially since I was sure you'd never find out." "Then why did you agree to marry me?" I asked. "Oh, Peter, your proposal at the Empire State Building was so perfect. No man had ever cared about me like that. It was so exciting, and I decided to go for it. I knew my parents would be upset, but that made it even more thrilling." I paused, processing her words. "So, how long after our honeymoon did you start using eye contact again?" "I promised myself I'd stay faithful," she said. "But when you went back to the West Coast, I got bored. Then I got a new batch of profiles from eye contact, and I missed the thrill of meeting new men. But I didn't act on it at first because I didn't want to hurt you. Then I had to go to Boston for work," she continued. "And I realized Boston was a different world. I updated my eye contact profile to that city, and when I went there," her voice trailed off, and we both knew what she had done. I recalled my first trip to the West Coast after our honeymoon, excited to return to her. I couldn't remember exactly when her first Boston trip was, but it couldn't have been more than a week or two later, less than a month after our wedding, and she was already cheating. "So, every time you went to Boston—" I left the question hanging, and she nodded, guilty. I changed direction. "Did Missy and Brianna know?" "Oh, yes," she said. "We've been together for so long that we don't keep secrets." "And they didn't care?" "No, they benefited too." She started, then stopped abruptly. I'd already guessed what she meant. "You passed your men to them," I said. "After you were done, you gave them to Missy and Brianna." She blushed. Well, there wasn't anything wrong with them. The three Misketeers, I thought. More like three little cheats. No wonder they didn't want to break up their living arrangement. "One last question," I said. "Why? Why couldn't you stop and just love me?" "I don't really know," she whispered. "When I got to Vassar, I was voted the hottest freshman. At first, I loved the attention and the intimacy. Then I dated an upperclassman, but it got boring, so I dumped him. I realized I liked the excitement of a new man, the thrill of the first time. After that, I was with a different guy almost every week, and I loved it." She smiled slyly. "Missy and Brianna loved it too," she continued. "After college, I started my job in investment banking, but the hours were long and most of the guys were married. I tried singles bars, but they were hit or miss. Then I found eye contact, and their members were top tier. It was like my personal buffet, new profiles every week." As she spoke, I realized she was dependent on this lifestyle, as surely as if she'd been hooked on pills. I stood up. The 30 minutes weren't quite over, but I'd heard enough. Seeing me rise, she stood too. "Baby, I know I hurt you, but I do love you. We could be happy if you could get past my need for excitement. It could work. You could even be with Missy and Brianna if you wanted." I felt nauseous, but before I could respond, Susan's father and her attorney returned with mine. The Devereaux attorney handed me a document. "I believe this agreement satisfies your requests, and your attorney has approved it." My attorney nodded in agreement. I picked up my grandmother's rings, pocketed them, and signed the document. As I stood, Walter Devereaux looked at me curiously. "I may have misjudged you, young man," he said, offering his hand. "Perhaps," I replied, "but I certainly misjudged your daughter. My opinion of you, however, remains unchanged." Ignoring his hand, I walked out the door. I got a lucky break. The Google colleague who had been living with Mickey and Beth got transferred, so I was able to move back in with them. They were incredibly supportive, always attentive to my emotions, and whenever I was feeling down, which was often, they tried to cheer me up. When my divorce was finalized, they even threw a big party at the club where Mickey worked. I was probably the only straight person there, but I still had a great time. Despite their efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling of being a failure. I had lost at the dating game, failed at love and marriage, and even moving back in with Mickey and Beth felt like a step backward. It wasn't their fault, but it felt like I was right back where I'd started. I saw Susan once. I was downtown for a late meeting and stopped by a lively restaurant afterward to grab something to eat. She was there, laughing and flirting with a younger guy. I recognized that giggle. It meant she was feeling frisky. My appetite vanished, and I left without her ever seeing me. I hadn't expected her to change, but seeing her act the same only deepened my sadness. A few weeks later, I got a call from a headhunter. If you work at a place like Google, those calls are common. This one was for a position heading network security for a major hospital chain. They were digitizing medical records and needed to address the security risks. What caught my attention, though, was that the job was in Nashville, my old hometown, now a big hub for hospital administration. I chuckled, wondering what Walter Devereaux would think of that. They made me an offer, and I accepted. New York had lost its appeal, and this opportunity came at just the right time. It was time to move on. Looking at my bags on the floor of the apartment, I realized how little I actually owned. I must be the cheapest relocation this company has ever had, I thought. The hardest part of the move was leaving Mickey and Beth. They'd seemed so quirky when I first met them, but now they were dear friends. When I reached out to shake Mickey's hand, he pulled me into a bear hug, reminding me how strong he was. "Don't forget us, Peter," he said seriously. "We won't forget you." I had planned to make a light comment, but I couldn't. "I won't forget you, man, I promise," I said. Then I turned to Beth and saw tears in her eyes. I couldn't speak, afraid I'd start crying too, so I leaned in to kiss her on the cheek. To my surprise, she turned her head and I ended up kissing her on the lips. She hugged me tightly, then quickly ran into her room. There was nothing left for me to do but grab my bags and flag down a cab. Nashville Redux Nashville felt both familiar and strange at the same time. I missed the constant buzz and excitement of New York, but I appreciated the warmth and hospitality of the people in Nashville. Just as important, I loved all the greenery. In New York, everything is concrete, with only the occasional tree struggling out of the sidewalk. In Nashville, grass and trees were everywhere, and I realized how much I'd missed that. I ended up buying a century-old home in East Nashville, in a neighborhood where young families were renovating older houses. Along with my bungalow came a couple of large, old trees and a small lawn to mow. It felt like the right place to be. Once settled, I started running again, something I hadn't done much of in New York. I joined a running club, which not only helped me stay active, but also gave me the chance to meet new people with similar interests. Many of them were women, and I gradually began dating again. That's how I ended up passing a gay nightclub that Saturday night with my date, and we saw a female impersonator performing on stage. She turned to me puzzled and asked, "I don't get it. Why do they do that?" I couldn't help but think of Mickey and Beth, remembering how unconventional they had seemed when I first met them. Then memories of Susan came flooding back, and it hit me that she was the real mystery. I still didn't understand her, and I doubted I ever would. I recalled that night in Grand Central Station and thought maybe Lady Gaga's words were the best explanation. I turned to my date and shrugged. Maybe they were born that way. As I sit on the porch of my century-old home, watching the sun set over the familiar Nashville skyline, I can't help but reflect on the twists and turns that brought me here. It feels like a lifetime ago that I stood in Grand Central Station, orchestrating a flash mob to impress a woman I thought I loved. In those moments, it seemed as if life was a series of elaborate surprises, each one bigger and more dazzling than the last. But life, as I've learned, isn't about the theatrics. It's about the quiet moments, the ones that don't need an audience. New York had a way of drawing me in, making me believe that the next big thing was always just around the corner. But after everything, I've come to realize that it's not the city that defines you, but the people who stand by you when the glamour fades. For me, those people were Mickey and Beth, my unlikely but true family, in a city where authenticity is often hard to find. They saw me at my lowest and reminded me that vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a strength. Moving back to Nashville was never part of my plan. In fact, for a long time I resisted the idea, thinking that returning would feel like a retreat, like admitting that I couldn't make it in the big city. But what I've learned in the years since is that strength isn't about staying where you're expected to be. It's about choosing where you want to be and, more importantly, who you want to become. Susan was a chapter in my life, a whirlwind of passion, deceit, and confusion. At one point, I thought she was my future, the person I would build a life with. But in the end, she was a mirror, reflecting back all the things I needed to confront about myself. Through her betrayal, I learned what I value most: honesty, loyalty, and the courage to be yourself, even when it's difficult. It would be easy to remain bitter, to let the hurt define me, but I've chosen a different path. I've chosen to see Susan, not as the woman who broke my heart, but as the catalyst that pushed me to truly understand what I need in a relationship. She showed me the importance of integrity and reminded me that love, real love, doesn't require constant surprises. It's built in the everyday, in the shared moments of laughter, in the quiet support during hard times, and in the trust that you're in it together, no matter what. Since returning to Nashville, I've rebuilt my life. I've found success in my career, leading a major hospital's network security team, a job that challenges and fulfills me in ways I never expected. I've made new friends, rekindled old connections, and even started dating again. But this time, I'm not looking for fireworks or drama. I'm looking for someone who sees me as I am, not as some grand gesture waiting to happen. One night, while out with a date, we passed a small gay club, and through the open door I caught a glimpse of a performer in drag, strikingly similar to the shows I used to watch with Mickey. It brought a smile to my face. When my date asked, "Why do they do that?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Because it's who they are," I said, realizing in that moment how much I've grown. Mickey and Beth had taught me to embrace who I am, to let go of the need to fit into any mold or expectation. And for that, I will always be grateful. The past has a funny way of lingering, but it no longer defines me. It's just a story I lived through, a series of experiences that shaped me into who I am today. Nashville has given me the space to breathe, to reflect, and to start fresh. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not looking for the next big surprise. I'm content with the steady rhythm of life, the simple, beautiful moments that make it all worthwhile. As the night settles in and the crickets begin their familiar song, I realize that I'm not running anymore. I'm home. And while I may never fully understand why certain things happened the way they did, I do know this. I'm stronger now, more at peace with myself, and more open to whatever the future holds. This is my story. Not of the one who got away, but of the one who found his way home.